For much of the mid-century era, this spectacular Art Deco tower was recognized as Chicago's Playboy building, a name that came with all the lifestyle flair one might expect. The company's massive 9-foot-tall neon letters redefined Chicago's skyline from above, while inside, the building operated like an adult wonderland. Although the celebrity class was very amused by all of this, not everyone in Chicago was on board. The neons irritated conservative civic groups who didn't want a counterculture adult magazine dominating their city, since, to be fair, the building had previously held a very different meaning for generations prior. From its very conception in 1929, the tower was intended to be a pristine monument to cleanliness. It was originally built as the global headquarters for the soap and toothpaste giant Colgate-Palmolive, and their corporate image was peppered throughout the architecture. Its dramatic, stepped-back silhouette was mathematically engineered to prevent dark shadows, allowing fresh air and healthy sunlight to pour down onto the streets below. At the crown, a blinding 2 billion candle power aviation beacon completed the corporate branding, slicing a pure beam of white light through Chicago's industrial soot. So, how exactly did this Roaring '20s landmark transition from notions of purity and cleanliness to a mid-century controversy? And what secrets still linger inside that top-floor executive penthouse? Stay tuned to find out as we explore the story of Chicago's Playboy building. I'm your host, Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. This story starts over New York City, when a 23-year-old English immigrant founded a small personal hygiene company. In 1906, William Colgate began selling products like starch, soap, and candles on Dutch Street in Manhattan. At the time, soap was a crude, messy product often made at home or bought in bulk by weight, a reality that William sought to innovate. His first step in doing so was simple, yet revolutionary. In the 1840s, his company began selling individually weighed, uniformly cut cakes of soap, effectively transforming a basic utility into a reliable consumer brand. To scale his business, he entered a series of critical partnerships, most notably joining forces with his brothers Bullis Colgate in 1813. Together, they aggressively diversified, expanding from laundry detergents into fine-scented perfumes. In doing so, they turned the company into the largest manufacturer of fragrances in the entire United States. By 1847, the operation had grown so massive that the boiling vats were too large to be installed on their Manhattan property, forcing William to move the entire operation across the Hudson into a sprawling, state-of-the-art facility in Jersey City. This was around the time that William's wealth reached astronomical heights. As a deeply religious man, affectionately known by those close to him as the Deacon of Colgate, he famously dedicated up to half of all his corporate earnings to charity, funding the distribution of things like Bibles worldwide and heavily endowing a small New York seminary that would later be renamed Colgate University in his honor, a legacy that stands until modern day. By the mid-1850s, the decades of breathing in industrial fumes and managing a global empire began to take their toll on William's health. On March the 25th, 1857, at the age of 74, he passed away at his home in New York, leaving behind a devoted wife of 46 years, Mary Gilbert, and 3 prominent sons. Robert, a successful lead manufacturer, and then there was Samuel, the man who had the most influence on the tower that would eventually rise over in Chicago. Samuel's genius was understanding the power of product diversification. Under his leadership, the company aggressively expanded into things like high-end perfumes and elegant toilet soaps. But his crowning achievement came in 1873, when the company introduced a new, pleasant-tasting dental cream packed into small glass jars. This was followed by the ultimate game-changer in 1896, marketing that same toothpaste as the world's very first mass-produced, collapsible metal squeeze tube. By the time Samuel passed away of heart complications in 1897, he had left behind a highly modernized corporate giant, then run by his sons. But the times were changing, as the 20th century brought fierce competition over in the Midwest. Up in Milwaukee, the Palmolive Company had struck gold with a green soap formulated entirely from palm and olive oils. At the same time, out of Kansas City, the Peet brothers dominated the laundry industry, So, in that context, as the Roaring Twenties hit full swing, a brutal market war broke out against their mutual rival, Procter & Gamble. This state of affairs led Midwestern corporations to realize that they could not survive on their own, and so they rushed into consolidation. This is where Procter & Gamble and Palmolive joined forces and set their sights on total national dominance. Not long after, they executed a massive stock swap merger to purchase the century-old, family-owned Colgate Company. And by pooling all of these resources together, they formed an unstoppable consumer empire. The resulting mega merger created the Colgate-Palmolive Peat Company, instantly making it the third largest consumer goods empire in the US. While the company still operated their industrial facilities in New Jersey, as well as California, executive leadership, headed by President Charles Pierce, faced a critical challenge. He desperately needed a singular, elite administrative center to govern the newly formed consolidated group. The natural choice was Chicago, but the location they chose surprised everyone. When Colgate-Palmolive purchased the site on North Michigan Avenue, it was a highly criticized gamble. At that time, most commercial activity took place deep inside Chicago's Loop. The northern end of Michigan Avenue was considered a quiet, low-rise residential district. So by breaking ground there, this building became one of Chicago's very first commercial skyscrapers, built entirely outside of the Loop, essentially pioneering what we now know as the Magnificent Mile. But it gets better, as they also decided to break some other major norms. Architects Halliburton and Root designed the building as a statement against New York City architecture. Well, New York's Art Deco masterpieces, like the Chrysler Building, relied on flamboyant features like custom-carved gargoyles and metal crown ornaments. The Palmolive Building, as it was then called, was designed with what they called disciplined verticality. Every single window pier and limestone column was engineered to slice straight upward without a single horizontal distraction. They even went as far as banning things like exterior fire escapes to keep the profile perfectly smooth. Now, instead of installing a flashy metal crown up top, the building relied on 6 dramatic, cascading limestone setbacks that tapered into a mountain-like peak. This was not just a style choice, it was a psychological design. By forcing the eye to travel seamlessly from the street all the way up to the clouds without reaching any ornamentation, it looked infinitely taller, more powerful, and completely pure. And when it comes to the design, they took the notion of purity far beyond just seamlessness. The building was intended not to cast a shadow. In an era when giant, blocky skyscrapers were just popping up everywhere, the public was very annoyed, and understandably, with having their sunlight constantly blocked. Apparently, back then, they associated a lack of sunlight with dampness, soot, and disease. So, to a soap and toothpaste company, those types of descriptions went directly against their brand image. They wanted their building to be a literal beacon of public health. To achieve this, the architects leaned heavily into Chicago's 1923 zoning laws, using a popular concept promoted by the futuristic architect Hugh Ferris. They designed a symmetrical structure that dramatically stepped back as it rose. By pulling the building's mass away from the street at the 3rd, 11th, 18th, and 22nd floors, they ensured that the tower would never cast a massive, oppressive shadow over the neighbors. They called it the shadowless design, with cascading limestone blocks that acted like a giant staircase into the sky, allowing the healthy, purifying sunlight and fresh Lake Michigan air to still cascade directly onto the busy sidewalks below. It was a brilliant solution. By August of 1930, the building got its final touch, a massive searchlight bolted to a steel tower 600 feet in the air. It was called the Lindbergh Beacon, named after the famous aviator at a time when he was the most prominent pilot on Earth. Now, the tower actually had 2 lights. One was a steady beam that pointed straight towards Municipal Airport, what we now call Midway, to help pilots find the runway. As for the main light, it rotated and lit at 2 billion candle power. On a clear night, the beam was so strong that pilots could see it from up to 500 miles away. To turn it on for the first time, President Hoover pushed a remote button from the White House, and this was a classic piece of 1930s showmanship. Technicians used a dedicated hardwire from Western Union telegraph lines running directly from a ceremonial button on the president's desk all the way to the top of the tower in Chicago. Though when Hoover pressed the button, it didn't send the power to the light beam directly. Rather, it sent a tiny but instant electrical pulse across the country that then tipped a heavy magnetic relay switch inside the building. That switch snapped shut, completing the massive local circuit and turning the light on for the very first time. Now, maintaining the light was a full-time job. The technician who looked after it would ride a tiny one-person elevator all the way up to the very top of the tower, from where he would step into the wind to change the carbon rods that kept the light burning. But here's the ironic part. Charles Lindbergh hated it. He completely boycotted the opening ceremony and privately said that the whole thing was a huge mistake. He argued that the spotlight belonged out on the dark runway, not spinning around in the middle of a major city. And he wasn't the only one who contested the beacon. According to several contemporary architectural logs and later civic retrospective accounts, we know that the wealthy Chicagoans living in the surrounding buildings protested aggressively as the light was so strong that it penetrated their bedroom curtains. Records like this don't only help us recall the events of the story, but they also show us that the people who shaped the story understood something simple. Whoever kept strong records usually came out ahead, as those who let their words disappear were left behind. I think about that more than I should, because producing this channel runs into the same problem, but just on a smaller scale. The recording was never really the hard part. It was everything that came before and after. The rewriting, resummarizing, losing the thread between an expert interview and the edit. So that's why I started using Plod to collect field notes, first-hand accounts with live sources, and personal notes. After which, I have an amazing searchable memory of ideas that I'd otherwise lose. In fact, I've been enjoying two of their devices. The Note Pro, a credit card-thin device that just sits on my desk during formal interviews with experts, and of course, the Note Pen S, a wearable variation that many of you may have noticed on my wrist in a few recent On Location episodes. It's hands-free, so if I have to scurry through a dangerous mine shaft or something like that, I can still capture critical information, the information that I need to script the episode when I go home. The functionality is very dependable. It's just one long press to record, and then one short press to highlight the moments that matter. It's kind of like snapping a photo of a document mid-recording, but without any interruption. So thanks to this device, I can capture the context, not just the audio. And because these beautiful devices handle both in-person sit-downs and online meetings, it follows the interview wherever it goes. All of my data syncs into the same place and creates structured summaries and action items automatically. Though perhaps the part I use most is Ask Plod, where instead of digging through entire recordings, I simply ask it to find the content I need, and it pulls the answers straight out of my own notes. In that context, it should go without saying that I always get consent from anyone before pressing record. Also, your data stays yours, and there's a strict no training policy. So nothing you record is ever used, for example, to train AI. This offer is genuinely low risk to try. There's a 30-day return policy, so spend less time on the after and get more out of every conversation by using the link in the description with code ITS10 to get my special offer. Thank you, Plod, for supporting this episode, but now back to our story. Just below the beacon was the highest enclosed room, a specialized mechanical area with a tiny panoramic lookout room designed specifically for visiting aviators to observe weather conditions and visibility over the lake. Just below was the penthouse, spanning the 35th through 37th floors. When the building opened, it was designed as the ultimate penthouse for visiting executives. It featured soaring 14-foot ceilings, private terraces carved into the building's setbacks, and massive bay windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The rooms were also wrapped in luxurious, custom-carved French mahogany paneling designed to resemble the best palaces of Europe for the wealthy soap barons who ran the company. The 34th down to 26th floors were reserved for executive offices, libraries, and meeting rooms. 25 to 17 held offices for international shipping, logistics, legal, and accounting, whereas 16 down to 5 were leased out for small businesses. Finally, the 4th to the 1st floors served as retail areas for some of Michigan Avenue's earliest elite shops. At ground level, the main lobby was designed as a moody, cathedral-like gallery. The walls were lined entirely with massive slabs of dark, highly polished Italian stone, meticulously cut so that the natural grain lines ran completely vertical, while the floor, featured a geometric pattern that mirrored the building's silhouette. The Palmolive building was also equipped with 13 elevators in total. This included the main high-speed passenger banks serving the commercial and executive floors, a freight elevator, and the famous tiny one-man elevator cab used exclusively by the building's caretakers to reach the top of that 600-foot tower for beacon maintenance. Underneath the street, the building had 2 subterranean levels. These basement spaces originally housed the building's giant boilers, a vertical conveyor belt waste system, and printing press, with vaults designed to absorb the machine vibrations before they could shake the skyscraper above it. From the grand opening in 1929, the building served as one of Chicago's most modern office centers. It redefined North Michigan Avenue as a high-end commercial rival to the Loop. And perhaps most curiously, in the 1930s, Colgate invented the concept of the soap opera. You see, they realized that housewives were home cleaning every afternoon, so to grab their attention, the company paid writers to create highly dramatic radio stories about things like romance and secrets. Every few minutes, the show would pause for a commercial, telling the listeners to buy soap. Because the soap company entirely funded those shows to sell their soap, the public jokingly started calling them soap operas, and the name stuck forever. Anyhow, by 1943, Colgate sold the building to bolster its capital during World War II. But even then, it remained the anchor tenant under a long-term lease. During the war, the skyscraper went dark when the Navy ordered the massive beacon to be turned off to prevent it from serving as a landmark for potential enemy air raids. As the post-war boom of the 1950s unfolded, the company gradually refocused its workforce in New Jersey, as they had a substantial corporate campus as well as executive offices in New York. Long story short, they pretty much took over the market and recognized that they no longer needed a skyscraper in the Midwest. The company gradually consolidated its operations, and in 1965, it officially handed the building's leasehold to a man who, in many people's opinion, represented the exact opposite of purity. In 1965, Hugh Hefner bought the operating lease of the Palmolive building for $1.9 million, officially renaming it the Playboy building. This takeover marked the peak of the magazine's cultural power and transformed the corporate office tower into a sleek, mid-century entertainment and media empire. Perhaps surprising to some who associate the magazine with LA, Chicago was actually the birthplace and operational heart of Playboy empire. By mid-1965, the company had completely outgrown its scattered offices and needed to centralize for a world headquarters. Crucially, the Palmolive building was just steps away from the original Playboy Club on Walton Street, a landmark that, up to this point in the story, Chicagoans had previously associated with the company. As you might imagine, when looking at this comparison, upgrading was a major brand opportunity for Hefner. By placing his magazine directly inside of one of Chicago's most elegant buildings, on one of the town's most prestigious streets, he could finally legitimize his activities. Once that lease was signed, the company set out to transform the building in ways that many felt was a downgrade. First, they gutted multiple floors to strip away that conservative 1930s soap office aesthetic, replacing it with a more bachelor pad design. The neon Playboy sign was mounted up top so that the entire city was made aware of their presence. Hefner claimed the top 3 floors for himself and chose to preserve the original French mahogany paneling in his main office, though he did add amenities such as private wet bars, a state-of-the-art media screening room, and some pool tables to the Penthouse. Not to mention the Bunny Lounge, which was a secure area for the company's most exclusive models, known then as Playboy Bunnies. This space was used to relax or to touch up their makeup between shifts at the neighboring club. As for the editorial and music review offices, those areas were outfitted with futuristic, custom-built egg chairs or semi-enclosed listening pods, featuring high-fidelity stereos and speakers molded directly into the headrests. The lower podium floors were completely retrofitted with custom-edge photography sets, specialized lighting rigs, and heavily secured darkrooms, designed to develop and archive the magazine's centerfolds and negatives. And so, throughout the rest of the 60s and into the 70s, this is where the company's real magic happened. In the meantime, traditionalist Chicagoans, civic groups, and architectural preservationists were horrified by the sight. They argued that by slapping a controversial adult magazine logo onto one of the city's most elegant buildings was vulgar. Conversely, the younger generation and the tourist loved it. And so back and forth the two sides went, but it didn't matter. By the 1980s, Playboy set out for Los Angeles. Hefner had already permanently relocated to his Playboy mansion as the enterprise faced mounting financial pressure due to the rising competition from raunchier magazines. So, to free up cash, Playboy sold its operating leasehold of the building in 1980, signing a temporary 10-year leaseback deal to keep their offices there throughout the rest of that decade. However, when that lease neared its end, the company downsized to a much smaller, cheaper, and more practical 100 square foot office on Lakeshore Drive. In 1989, the editorial staff packed up. The iconic neon letters were stripped from the facade, and the building was renamed 919 North Michigan Avenue, and it stayed that way until luxury condo conversions happened many years later. Immediately after the magazine moved out, the building's new management desperately wanted to strip away the stigma that it had left behind. This was crucial so that they could attract well-to-do corporate tenants again. First, they legally changed the skyscraper's name to the comparably more dull street address, and for the decades that followed, it functioned as a standard, somewhat dated commercial office space. Then, at the turn of the millennia, the tower was placed on the city's landmark registry. In 2003, it was further added to the Federal National Register of Historic Places. So, legally speaking, the building was protected from things like the wrecking ball or tacky neon signs. In 2001, a developer bought the tower and converted the entire space into 100+ ultra-luxury residential condominiums, as it remains to this very day. And finally, they also restored the original name. And so it's safe to say, the building has been restored to its former glory. According to one source, the actor Vince Vaughn bought the historic 3-story Hefner penthouse in 2006 for $12 million, only to spend years after trying to sell it. In the end, it was simply too massive for most buyers, so he split the penthouse into separate units, which then sold for a handsome price. Finally, and this is my favorite part, in 2007, to celebrate the building's rebirth, a brand new, updated beacon was placed back on the crown. But to prevent yet another war with the neighbors, the light is locked and only shines out towards the waters of Lake Michigan. So that's the story of Chicago's Playboy building. I really hope that you all enjoyed it, and another special thanks to Plaud for supporting the channel. Otherwise, we're going to leave it there for today, but as always, this is Ryan Socash, signing off.